All right, I think we're live now. So I wanted to start the stream just to cover over masteries and not only really good setups that I use, but also what each specific mastery is for. So this is the current mastery setup that I'm running right now. And this is tailored towards my tech champions and my skill champions. Specifically the ones that I use in Alliance War, because I've been using Zemo and Ironheart a lot. So just real quick, the way that they're benefiting is, for one, this deep wounds mastery right here. And even though Zemo's bleeds last forever, he has something special in his kit where when this mastery has lots of ranks in it, that it makes the bleeds do more damage. And then this Despair Mastery might be one of the most important, and I can talk more about this later, but up to a maximum of 7 debuffs applied on the opponent, you reduce their healing. So this can get countered in Alliance War by a different mastery in defense, but you're still going to be significantly lowering their regeneration rate whenever you're playing against them. So even if you don't have a champion that can heal block, if you have the Despair Mastery and you can apply lots of debuffs, you can basically shut off their regeneration. Another way that this is tailored towards the tech champions is this one right here. This is one that I've only been using for about the last 8 months or so. And this reduces the opponent's combat power rate by 18%. So you're talking about that they're gaining significantly less power when you're striking them. So much so that when you're using a tech champion, you will get to your special one before they will. That's how potent it is. I really like to use this whenever I'm running Ironheart. I use her on the Cold Snap and Bleed Hazard Shift node a lot. And for that reason, I like to use these two masteries right here, Coagulate and Suture. So Coagulate reduces the amount of damage that you take from bleed. So at max rank, it's 30%, right? And then over here, you also have Suture, which reduces the duration. So on Hazard Shift, where they're going to be applying, there's a 40% chance that you get a bleed. You want those to expire faster, because Ironheart isn't immune to bleed. So if you pick a champion that has a really high either energy resistance, or if they're completely immune to Cold Snap, you can use these two masteries and get by just fine, and you don't have to just dance around and prevent yourself from hitting them. Also, this mastery is really huge right here, Inequity. And this also works on Hazard Shift, because when you have a lot of debuffs on the opponent, it reduces the damage that you take from those Hazard Shift debuffs right here, up to 36%. So you're talking about over a third of that damage is reduced. So if you would have taken 1,000 damage per second, now you're only taking 640 per second instead, which is a significant less amount. Willpower is pretty standard, and that just allows you to heal. So on those Hazard Shift nodes, you are going to be regenerating a little bit, and then those other masteries kind of help you out. Very infrequently, I will also use this mastery right here. I'll put 1 point in this Resonate, because that also inflicts a weakness, and that also reduces their attack even further, more than the Inequity Mastery would already. And it would also contribute to the Inequity Mastery because it is a debuff. So those are the masteries that I primarily use, tailored towards the skill class and the tech class, because those are the two I use in Alliance War the most. So I only have 1 point in all of these. And the only reason I have points in any of these at all is so that we can unlock Despair, and then the Suicide Masteries whenever you use those. Courage, some people put 1 point in here. Some people will take the point out of Courage and put it into this Precision. I only have 4 out of 5 because that's all you need. Because in order to unlock both the Glass Canyon and the Despair Masteries, you only need 15 points. So for me, if you can see, I have 1 in Strength and Greater Strength, And then I have 1 in Pierce here, and then 1 in Courage, so that's 4. And then 5 and 6 for lesser precision, lesser cruelty. So then I only need 9 more points in that. So I could technically take this point out of Courage and put it into precision. But you definitely want to be maxing out your cruelty and precisions if you're relying on champions that need critical hits pretty often. And pretty much every champ is going to be benefiting from those. Those are pretty standard. And I'll talk about the suicide masteries and recoils and glass cannon after a while. When I'm running Battlegrounds, I almost always like to use this unfazed because this helps you go unstoppable whenever the opponent evades. This is very tricky whenever you're trying to use Count Nefaria in Alliance War, because whenever you try to evade, there's a small chance that the opponent is going to go unstoppable. They won't get knocked back, and they'll just start hitting right into you. So like if you're trying to use him on an intercept node, and you use that evade as an intercept hit because it does count, just like if you're using Kate Bishop, the opponent, if they have this unfazed mastery equipped, then they're going to go unstoppable and it's not going to work. Even though you will get the intercept technically, but you'll probably take a combo to the face. Yeah, so this is my pretty standard Alliance War setup that I use specifically for Path 4. I like to put a lot of points in block proficiency as well. Specifically because that chip damage adds up over time. And the last thing I want to do is be activating Ironheart's regeneration early when I don't want it to activate. And then also just in general, you would prefer to take less damage, especially if you have to fight Serpent and it's mandatory to take damage in the block or Photon, something like that. And then parry and dexterity are pretty standard. This one you could put more points in, but then again, if you're playing high-tier Alliance War, you're not planning to get hit anyway or get stunned by the opponent. So I only have just the 1 point in here that's mandatory to unlock Limber or Stupefy. Because Stupefy will prevent the opponent from lowering your stun too much. Because the enemy probably has 5 out of 5 for Limber for their Alliance War defense. So if you don't have Stupefy, even if you only have 2 out of 3, I've noticed this is really difficult because I was in Battlegrounds and I only had 2 out of 3 points in Stupefy. And I was getting parried after I parried the opponent because the stun fell off too fast. So this is a must to have 3 out of 3. Limber, if you're using it for offensive purposes, you don't really need it. You want that 5 out of 5, though, if you're on defense for sure. So now I'm going to go to my traditional Alliance War defense, and this is my default. And as you can see, I still have just 1 point in Courage and 4 out of 5 in Precision. That's pretty standard. Despair, always I'm going to keep that 3 out of 3. I don't think that's ever going to change for whatever reason. Obviously, Deep Wounds, I'm not too worried about that at all. This Assassin Mastery is really big for Alliance War defense. And this can help shut off some of those cheat death mechanics that you see from Hercules, Hela, Punisher. Some of them, it's getting a little more tricky to reduce their ability accuracy. But it increases your attack whenever the enemy is below 18% health. So that means that the enemy is more likely to die on your final hits than they are to stay alive and be around 2 to 3%. And it means you're going to hit harder naturally. And then it's going to reduce their ability accuracy by 20%. So they have a 1/5 chance that it's going to fail completely. That also helps on nodes like 46, where it has Aspect of Evolution, and they increase their ability accuracy per bar of power that they gain. This mastery enables me to use someone like Spider-Man Pavita Prabarker, that I can solo Serpent just using his marked passive. So that's something that I'm always going to have on defense because I don't want my opponents trying to use some kind of cheat death mechanic if they're using Serpent or Hercules or what have you. And it also just means that as if they're trying to kill my defenders and they get low on health, my defenders are going to hit harder. And then I have 1 point in unfazed. I don't really think that I would ever put more than just 1 point in unfazed because there's not really a point. Oh, and Aru's asking about the 60% attack. Yeah, so if my defender is on defense and I have 5 out of 5 assassin, my defender will get 60% more attack whenever the opponent is below 18% health. So it doesn't apply to the whole fight. It only applies if the opponent gets low on health. So it's kind of not really a trade-off, but it's going to be a pretty rare scenario that the opponent is going to be below 18% health. However, it reduces their ability accuracy when that does happen. I guess you could call this more of an insurance policy mastery. For the most part, it doesn't apply to the whole fight. The ones that will increase your attack are going to be the suicide masteries, basically. Yeah, so I covered despair. I only have 1 point in deep wounds, and then unfazed. Yeah, I just have 1 point. So that's going to help me. My defenders will go unstoppable, especially if they're using Count Nefaria or Kate Bishop or someone else that evades a lot. Yeah, that would work with any evade champions. I don't know why I keep bringing up those two. But yeah, on intercept nodes, it really helps out when people try to use that evade to intercept. Yeah, it's handy so that you don't get in a pinch just because the opponent evades. Max inequity is a really big one here that I'm always going to use because debuffs are a part of the game, especially in Battlegrounds where everybody's using suicide masteries. By using inequity, that basically reduces the effect of their suicide masteries. Not quite rendering them useless, but it means that because they have 2 debuffs on them, they're losing part of their attack already. And then add that on top of if Jean Grey puts on exhaustions, or if High Evolutionary puts on his debuffs as well, they're going to get less and less attack rating. Yeah, so for this one, I don't have the block proficiency. Because normally when you have a defender, they're not going to be getting their block hit a whole bunch. Most of the time, they're going to be taking hits directly. But the stand your ground mastery prevents them from being able to just spam heavy attacks in the corner. Or even if they're using a play style with someone like Hulkbuster, that makes it so much harder for them to corner you. Obviously, if they have someone that has unblockable, or someone like Mole Man that resists all of that, it's not going to work. It's not going to have any effect. But this right here, Recovery Mastery, this is the big one that prevents Despair from shutting off regeneration. Because if the opponent has the Recovery Mastery on, then this Despair Mastery isn't going to reduce their regeneration all the way. So when they do have 3 out of 3 in recovery, that's increasing their regeneration rate past 100%, meaning that you will never get it to 0 or below 0. Unless you're using someone that reverses regeneration, like if they're using Leader or Void or Count Nefaria, or even Torch. Some of those champions can completely reverse their regeneration. Recovery is basically to counter Despair and prevent them from going all the way under. When we had the Big Thing Alliance War Challenge, where there were only 10 fights, 10 nodes, node number 3, if the opponent had Recovery Mastery on, you couldn't rely on Despair. So like someone like a Tuma, or even Photon, you wouldn't be able to just use Shuri because she has debuffs and non-contact attacks, and that would be a safe fight. It wouldn't work because the opponents have the Recovery Mastery on. Solve, I probably don't need 3 out of 3 points in this, but I do just because that's the way everything worked around. Obviously, you're going to want Willpower. That's a really big mastery to have because you want to be able to recover anytime the opponent gives you debuffs, especially if it's Hazard Shift. I don't think there's a whole lot of discussion that needs to go on for Willpower, except that unless you're fighting on like Node 4 that applies a whole bunch of Petrifies on you, you want this 3 out of 3. Now, when I do take that, and it's a fight that I'm really worried about, I will completely reset and turn off all of my defensive masteries, and then I'll fill them in one by one. Basically put this back completely the same as it was. Okay, now to the proficiencies. Like I said, these two, limber is pretty standard to have 5 out of 5 because that reduces the stun because everybody's going to be using parry. And then obviously stupefy, because if I get a chance to somehow reparry when my defenders are on defense, then those will last longer. Now, Mystic Dispersion. This is a really important mastery, especially if you have Mystic Defenders. I also run this whenever I'm in Battlegrounds, and people debate whether it should be 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5. I like to keep it 5 out of 5 because of how many potent Mystics that I have in my battle deck. I know a lot of the recent Mystic champions are starting to rely on this less, almost to the point where they don't benefit from it at all. I think Madeline Pryor is one of those that doesn't benefit at all. But it's still something that I like to have, especially for champions like Mojo. But if debuffs or if buffs expire at all off of the opponent, you're going to start gaining power. And power is victory, basically, especially in Battlegrounds. It's how fast can you get up to your special attacks. Yeah, I think that's everything as far as my Alliance War defensive masteries. This is also what I tend to run in Battlegrounds. Obviously, it'll depend. Yeah, Kindred would work for sure for Mystic Dispersion, obviously. Especially where he's going to cause debuffs to expire even more due to atrophy. But yeah, I tend to tweak my masteries a little bit if the Alliance War season calls for it. Specifically this current season where you don't get any points for how much health that you have remaining. So for this one, I have 3 out of 3 on Glass Cannon. And that reduces your health but increases your attack rating. So this is one of those where you can gain more attack at the cost of your health. So if you feel really comfortable with your skills that you're not going to be losing that much health, this would be a good trade-off to be able to hit harder for sure. And then Recoil Masteries. For this one, I had it as 3 out of 3. Whenever I was climbing the victory track to get up to the Gladiator Circuit, I put 3 points into this Recoil Mastery because it benefits the special attacks. And for the most part, the special attacks will kill when you're talking about Jean Grey and Shothra and some of these others that are nuke attackers. Once you get that power and you launch that special attack, the fight's over. For the most part. And for that reason, I wanted those to hit as hard as possible. And if I remember correctly, I think it was a 55 or 60% increase in attack rating. And then it's a sacrifice of 10% health. And for me, that was a good trade-off to have. And I was very quickly able to get up through the victory track and even get 100 points in Gladiator Circuit. Yeah. This is a very, very conditional mastery to have on. And it really benefits champions that don't take lots of damage from poison or bleed, because then they will regenerate all that health back. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the bleed and poison. Because this Liquid Courage will apply a permanent poison debuff that drains health per second. Now, the wording of this mastery means that if you're immune to poison, you will still benefit from the increase of attack, right? Now, Hercules has a synergy with everybody that if they're suffering from the poison, they also get even more attack rating. Now, that would not work if they're immune to poison, because then they're not suffering from the Liquid Courage mastery. But this mastery still works even on robots or people immune to poison. And then Double Edge right here, this applies for the entirety of the fight as well, even though the bleed will only last for 16 seconds. And as you saw earlier, if you have on the Coagulate and Suture masteries, this bleed will deal less damage, and it will expire faster, meaning the bleed will be completely gone. Obviously, this still applies to champions even if they're immune to bleed, for sure. So then I also have on the Assassin Mastery, Battlegrounds, you're trying to kill them as quickly as possible. You want to be able to deal more damage and try to shut those off if possible. All their cheat death mechanics. For defense, I have Inequity. Because that, when I'm applying debuffs, that will also reduce the amount of damage that I take from the poison and the bleed. So this is a really handy mastery to have. I definitely recommend 3 out of 3 Inequity across the board for basically everything, especially with how many debuffs that we apply per fight for people like a Koye or Jean Grey. Someone like Carolina Dean wouldn't benefit from this because she applies passives instead of debuffs, so that wouldn't work. And then again, the Stand Your Ground Mastery. And then just like what I had with the tech and skill masteries that I had set, I don't have Limber maxed out. I just have one because I don't plan on getting hit when I'm using my attack masteries. Now, this Cosmic Mastery, I think I have unlocked up to rank 3. I haven't really messed around with it at all. But most of your Cosmics are going to remove armor up buffs anyway. So you wouldn't really benefit from this as much, especially if you're using somebody that's removing armor entirely, whether you're pulverizing it or applying armor breaks to get rid of it, whether you're using Null and the Living Abyss gets rid of the armor at all. This doesn't really do as much as some of the others do. So I don't see hardly anybody run this Cosmic Awareness at all because you're going to be getting rid of them anyway. As far as this Science Serum, all it does is give you energy resistance. And this seems like it would be pretty niche. I can see this being used on like a Hazard Shift with Photon where she already has really, really high energy resistance. And then you add on more and basically those debuffs don't deal hardly any damage at all. But I don't think that I've unlocked this. Maybe I've unlocked this up to rank 2. I don't remember, but I haven't invested in this at all. Obviously, I have Collar Tech maxed out in one of my other loadouts because it's definitely worth it, in my opinion. Reducing combat power rate is something that is definitely relevant and super important to the game and always will be. Now, this is where it gets tricky because I've unlocked this Mutagenesis Mastery to 5 out of 5. Specifically so that I can use mutant champions on Hazard Shift nodes if I need to. And that just means that bleed debuffs will expire. I think maxed out, it's 2.5 seconds faster. And obviously, you could then run your Suicide Masteries. If you have someone like Omega Red who's going to be immune to poison, and then every single bleed debuff is going to expire faster. Even though, you're going to be in the death field whenever that bleed is applied anyway. You wouldn't want this for someone like Sinister. And then, obviously, you have a bunch of champions that are going to be benefiting, that are going to either be bleed immune or bleed resistant. So this really is one of those shelved masteries as well that people aren't going to be using much. And then this skill is just giving armor and resistances with critical hits. This might be something that I start investing in more, especially where I'm starting to use Hitmonkey, and then Chielth and Zemo a lot more. And then I have Yelena rank 5 as well. However, I see this being a conditional mastery as well. I mean, mastery points are super rare and super important. So to waste them on a mastery like that, I think would be unwise in most scenarios. That's just my 2 cents. And then these detections, I think these should just be scrubbed from the game because these were only really relevant back when it was Act 3, 4, and 5, where you had nodes that you didn't know what they were ahead of time. And then they added these in there, I'm assuming, because they were planning on using that even more. But in all honesty, now you have enough banger attackers in every single class that you could probably take anybody from any class. So, yeah, they don't have those hidden nodes anymore. Yeah, so as far as making a perfect mastery setup for any and all champions, I recommend this setup right here. As far as this basic Alliance War defense setup. This is going to work for almost all of your champions completely. And you're not really going to get any benefit for certain classes. However, if you know who you're going to place on defense, you can start to work around and add in things like physical resistance if you think that it's a champion that is going to... most of the counters deal a lot of physical damage. Like if it's going to be a tech attacker and you're thinking people are going to be using Corvus, then you could use physical resistance or even energy resistance if you think that it's going to be a mystic that someone's going to try to use torch, and that energy resistance helps. Also, you can get really technical about what personal stats that you have for each champion, where they have a main attack and a main defense stat if it's a 7-star. But I think Inequity is one of the best masteries to have, and it applies to almost anybody that gives debuffs. Other than that, you could put the Resonate in there. However, if they have Willpower on, that's just going to give them more healing. So I think Inequity, Assassin, and Despair are the main masteries that you really want to heavily invest in, that you can use across all different game modes. And then you can use Mystic Dispersion at your own discretion if you need to. Limber and Stupefy, I assume most people have those invested in as well. I don't even worry about these XP and gold masteries. As you can see, I have more than enough gold, 231 million. It's not going away anytime soon. I think I'll be fine. And then XP, we top out at 70 levels, and I'm already almost to level 68. Okay. So, yeah, across all three of my masteries, you can see the same ones popping up, where it's Willpower and Inequity. And then I always have Despair on, as you can see, across all three of my setups. And then I put a few points in Assassin, and then it'll be dependent whether or not I put them in Deep Wounds as well. Yeah, and then I'm pretty sure everybody knows about Parry and Dexterity. Those are a must, but you really only need 1 point in either, unless you're going for that extra additional block proficiency. But then again, you're only getting a few extra percent out of that. Yeah. I think that's everything I have that I can say about masteries. If y'all have any additional questions, please let me know. I'll try to post this to my YouTube page as well for people to revisit as needed. So the question is, if I'm using Jean Grey and I apply 9 Neuroshocks, then the healing will stop? Technically, yes. This will max out at 7 debuffs, because then, in theory, that would be 105% of their regeneration, but you can only reduce 100%. So 7 Neuroshocks would be the max that you would be reducing as much healing as you're able to reduce from this mastery. But like I mentioned, if they have the recovery mastery, they will still have a little bit of regeneration still. I think that if they're up to 115%, then they'd get down to about 90%. And no, passives wouldn't work for this. It has to be debuffs applied to the enemy. So if you use your special one, if you're using Jean Grey, and you convert all of those neuroshocks into passives, then they're going to start regenerating at their normal 100 and some percent, whatever they have. And then you would need to apply more neuroshock debuffs to turn their healing back down. Which, if you're using Jean Grey, you're going to do that anyway as you're building up to your special 2. So when you're fighting Yelena, you don't have to worry about her regenerating, because once you remove all of those neuroshock debuffs, they don't have any debuffs to heal back from, because when they use willpower, they're trying to regenerate from a debuff. So if you turn those debuffs to passives, there's no regeneration for the enemy. Okay, so here just real quick, I'm going to show how the regeneration wouldn't completely be knocked down. I'm going to use a 5-star, just so the fight lasts a little bit longer. So I'm just going to be using light attacks here. So as you can see, she's regenerating 350, and then now that's down to 150. And now it's still at 150 because that's where it tops out at. And then once I get up to 15, she doesn't have the exhaustion on her anymore, so she's only regenerating the base 2%. And see, now she's starting to regenerate more. Saw it was at 999, then it was at 425, and then it was at 350. And now it's at 125. And now it's only at 75. Yeah. So when she was regenerating 150, whenever it had the 9 neuroshocks on her, it was because there was also an exhaustion. So her healing was capped at 75 per tick from the debuffs. But because I had 2 unique debuffs, she was regenerating 150. So that's how that works. That's how those numbers are more or less tailored. All right, well, I think that's all that I'm going to say about Masteries. Feel free, I'm going to post this to YouTube. If you have any additional questions about Masteries, please put them in the comments, and I'll try my best to answer them however is applicable for the question. Thank you guys so much.